and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Welcome to the Tuesday edition of Point of View, and as we announced yesterday, just a minute, we're going to be talking with Coach Joe Kennedy. That'll give you a chance to learn more about his life. Of course, we'll talk about his book. We'll talk about the movie. We also have a link to the interview he did at Coral Ridge Ministries. We'll talk about some of his involvement there. Next hour, we're going to have Gary Chapman with us for a while as we talk about this new book, A Simple Guide to a Better Marriage. But then we're going to get into some of the issues in the news. Now, if you look at your calendar, you recognize it's April 1st, but this is not an April Fool's joke, because tomorrow Donald Trump is referring to April 2nd as Liberation Day. So we're going to talk about this idea of tariffs, what that might mean. I've already posted kind of a pro and a con by two individuals that we've used before as articles. So again, these are pretty wise individuals talking about, one, a pro, tariffs will make America rich again. A con, free trade is what you live in your life. And so we'll talk about some of that. And then the most asked question that I'm receiving off air is it really possible that Donald Trump could run for a third term? Now, the first time I heard that was from Bill Maher. By the way, Bill Maher and Kid Rock had dinner with Donald Trump the other day. You can't make that up. And that's not, again, an April Fool's joke. That really did happen. But our friend Jim Dennison has put together 5 ways President Trump might serve a third term. So, again, we're not making that up. We'll probably get into some of that later. And it just illustrates, again, that there is always something to talk about here on Point of View. But I would imagine all of you are very familiar with Coach Joe Kennedy. Just count the number of times we've had either Kelly Shackelford for First Liberty Institute or one of the individuals that work with him on the program. And we followed from really the very beginning his story, a time in which he, as an 18-year Marine veteran, then became an assistant coach for Bremerton High School on the varsity team, but wanted to actually always have a time in which he would give thanks at the center of the field at the 50-yard line, and that ultimately resulted, as you well know, into a lengthy court battle. And on June 27th, 2022, a little less than 3 years ago, Coach Kennedy received his First Amendment rights. After that, he was then reinstated as an assistant coach, actually did that for one game and retired. And as a result, now is an individual that is traveling around speaking first about his own story, which is incredible, and second of all, speaking on this very important issue of free speech. So, Coach Joe Kennedy, welcome back to Point of View.
Hey, good to hear your voice again.
You know, when we talk about this, again, the title of the book and the movie, Average Joe, and that's really the case. If somebody had told you, say, 50 years ago that you would be the center of a national spotlight and that now you'd be traveling around the country speaking on free speech, speaking on religious liberty, speaking on standing up for your faith, I just don't think you would have believed it.
Yeah, I wouldn't have believed it, 10 years ago. It seems so far-fetched and over such a silly thing to fight over and have to make national news over. It's just ridiculous.
Well, if we can. I think most people know your story, but I thought just for anybody, former atheist, really kind of a troubled backstory that you have certainly talked about before. It is something that you oftentimes share when you speak in front of a group. So we can talk about that for just a minute for anybody that isn't familiar with the incredible story of Average Joe.
Yeah, I'm one child from birth. I was put up for adoption. I was in and out of group homes, foster homes, and boys' homes, and got kicked out of just about every school you could possibly imagine. I think it was 11 or 12 different schools. I needed to find something in my life, and I thought that was the Marine Corps, which was a wonderful career, but I lived according to the world and God was not part of that program whatsoever. And I found my love for the country, love for our Constitution, and I became something greater than myself at that point. And I served honorably and loved it. And then God got a hold of me right as I was retiring from the Marine Corps, met with my childhood sweetheart. And next thing I know, I'm on the altar giving my life to God. And 2 weeks later, I'm getting offered a job to coach high school football. And from there, I think life was absolutely perfect at that point. I had everything that I've ever wanted. Everything was smooth, and I prayed after football games for 8 years, and we were in our 8th season before anybody ever had a problem with it. And then it just kind of all fell apart and turned into an ugly legal battle for the next 8 years.
Well, and again, one of the things we've talked about before, and Kelly Shackelford's been here talking about other individuals that had their religious freedom taken away. And I remember one in particular said, look, I didn't go, and this is a man that was much older than us, overseas and fight in Europe so that I come back and be told I couldn't pray in my particular unit at home. And so there's a sense in which you are a Marine and you were fighting for freedom and you were fighting for this nation. And then all of a sudden, a former Marine, assistant coach in Bremerton High School in Washington State, finds himself in the midst of a controversy. There had to be some discontinuity between the two.
Oh, absolutely. I really didn't know what to do as far as, quote unquote, a Christian. What do you do when your employer asks you to do something that is not right? And I struggle with it, and would have been really easy to just not fought the school district and just gone along with it and let them take the rights away from me. But if they did this for me, imagine what they could do for everybody. And I've seen the erosion of our constitutional rights as Americans for the past, 30 years since I've become aware of them. And I said, no, as a Marine, as a red-blooded American, that's where the fight was. And I said, I will stand up and I will fight and I will die on this hill to defend the Constitution and our First Amendment of the freedom of speech and the free exercise of our religion.
Well, again, let's take a break, and when we come back, I want to get into a few more details about that and then talk about some of these new opportunities that God has placed before you. But let me also say to our listeners, I'm going to open up the phones fairly early because it is quite possible that some of you have read the book, seen the movie, maybe heard some of the interviews, watched some other interviews, maybe would like to ask a question or make a comment, or maybe just an encouragement to Coach Joe Kennedy. So we wanted to provide that as well. If you find yourself saying, I'd like to know some more, first of all, you can click on his picture. That will take you to his website, which is CoachJoeKennedy.com. Don't have to remember all that because we have the link. We have a trailer of the movie, Average Joe Movies. So if you've never seen the movie, but at least like to know a little bit about it, that is the case. And then we have the interview he did at Coral Ridge. And we're going to talk more about his connection with Coral Ridge in just a minute on the City of God, When Your Faith Cost Your Job, with Coach Joe Kennedy. So there are a lot of ways in which you can learn a little bit more. This hour will probably go pretty fast. And if you find yourself saying, I'd like to know more, maybe, we could maybe have him come and speak at our church or something like that. We've given you all the links that you would need right there on the website, pointofview.net. Let's take a break, though. We'll continue our conversation with Coach Joe Kennedy right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
We face a battle for truth every day. That is why I was delighted to interview Dr. Jeff Myers of Summit Ministries on his new book, Truth Changes Everything. His first 4 chapters focus on truth in various ways. One chapter explores the differences between the truth viewpoint and the truths viewpoint. Another chapter tells ancient stories about truth. More importantly, he provides a method to evaluate different views of truth and show how non-biblical views of truth always fail. One of the most valuable sections of the book are the 8 chapters that go into detail about how Jesus followers have changed art, science, justice, work, as well as a perspective on so many important ideas. For example, Jesus followers have changed how we value life. Until Jesus, care, charity, and compassion were usually seen as defects rather than virtues. That we consider human life valuable and want to help others through the development of medicine and mental health care can be attributed to a biblical worldview. Jesus followers have changed the world of science. He explains that nearly every founder of various scientific disciplines during the scientific revolution was a Christian or at least a theist. Jesus followers have changed the world of art by making the case for objective beauty. We can also add the influence Christians have had in politics with the writings that set forth principles we hold based upon law, liberty, and freedom. He concludes with practical ideas and describes 14 ways to practice speaking up in a way that builds truth. If you want to understand today's challenges and want to provide a wise biblical response, I recommend Truth Changes Everything. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Inflation, go to viewpoints.info/inflation. That's viewpoints.info/inflation. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back to our conversation with Coach Joe Kennedy. And if you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. We'll open up the phones in just a minute, give you a chance to join the conversation. But, Coach, let's see if we can, for people that aren't familiar, why did you actually decide to go to the 50-yard line and pray? Why was that so important? And I think, again, many of us that have either seen the movie, read the book, or heard your interviews know that. But I know that some of our listeners might say, why was that such a big deal? Can you explain that?
Yeah, it originally goes back to when I accepted the Lord and I made a covenant with him that I would give him my life. Since he called me to coaching, and that was very evident, I was watching the movie Facing the Giants from the Kendrick brothers.
Yes.
And it was a confirmation and just, I felt the calling of the Lord to coach. And on my living room floor, I said, Lord, I hear you. And I said, I will give you the glory after every game, win or lose, right there on the battlefield. And that's the way it started, was just a simple covenant with God. And a man's only as good as his word, especially with his God. So that's why it was so important. And, on top of that is I always taught my guys, leadership by example. And I wanted to practice what I preached. And here's an opportunity that I was faced with choosing between my faith and my job. And what was the right thing to do? Well, obviously it's to, you follow your word and you follow your God. And so, I would have been the biggest hypocrite in the world if I would have just down and, this might become uncomfortable, or this might, affect my life in a negative way. But these young men definitely need to know that life has consequences, good and bad. But standing up for what is right is always the right thing to do.
Well, and again, if you think about it at the time, there were people taking the knee to protest everything from racism to police brutality to the flag or whatever it might be. And yet, having grown up in California, my wife from the Pacific Northwest, we know that that would be permissible, certainly in Bremerton and other places in Washington, Oregon, California, whatever it might be, or even on the East Coast. But taking a knee to pray was, I think, for some people, too much to allow. And yet, as you said, it went on for 8 years, and it went from just you going out there by yourself to eventually having many of the athletes, many of your players coming out. True?
Yeah, that was one of the beauties of it. It wasn't just our team. They started inviting the other team. And if you can imagine, we had every team in our league out there praying on the 50-yard line after each game. And that was incredible to see these kids going from fist fighting to
wow.
It was incredible.
Yeah, again, I think that's just a good illustration of that. There was a time before, I live in the state of Texas, although originally from California, and they had a case a while back where they said you couldn't have a prayer before a high school football game. And the argument from the Supreme Court is that a Texas high school football game is not a religious event. Well, they've never been to a Texas high school religious event called a Texas football game. But nevertheless, you had those kind of precedents. So when finally, after years of doing this, somebody decided to complain, that's where everything blew up in our faces, right?
Yeah, it actually came from a compliment. Somebody called and said what we were doing was awesome after they witnessed this prayer.
Yes.
And then that's when everybody went sideways on it. And their lawyers, of course, they are so risk adverse. Instead of dealing with prayer itself and educating people on what was being done and what the Constitution says, they took a hard line and said, no, we're just going to remove it. They're under the guise of this separation of church and state and have absolutely no idea what that actually means. It's just been, horribly done over the past, 50 years. Yes. That we really turned it into something went away from its true meaning.
That's right. Well, again, let's kind of summarize a long process of first going to the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Washington and losing, then going to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, which is in California, and losing, and then eventually making your way to the Supreme Court. And in January 2022, they agreed to hear the case. And then a ruling came down in June of 2022. But that was a long process. And I think both the book and the movie illustrate some of the tensions between you and your wife because of the fact that this has become so difficult and so wrenching in terms of your marriage and your circumstances.
Oh, yeah. There's no words that could describe it. She was the human resource director for the school district. And we had 2 kids in the high school. So this was immediate effect on our family and our home life. This wasn't something just, that happens to both of us at in our home. And it lasted 8 years. So we lost 7 times on the Supreme Court.
Yes.
And I tell you, that is a long time. And trying to explain to your wife that this fight is more important than everything, even our marriage. That's a hard pill to swallow. But when you put God first, it's amazing what happens. And we finally saw eye to eye in that, and nothing can separate us now.
Let me just mention that we already have a call coming in. We'll take some others, 1-800-351-1212. But I thought just to finish it off, take us back to June 27th, 2022. You're finding out about this decision, and it was almost surreal, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I wish I could have celebrated it more. I wish it was more of a victory feel to it. But it was really the biggest sense of relief that you could possibly imagine, because in lower courts, the way that they ruled was that any display of religion in the public square could get you terminated. And if that would have stuck, if we would have lost at the Supreme Court, that would have been what was on the books forever. And I would have been the one that removed all religious freedom for all Americans. So that was a weight lifted off my shoulders that I did not want.
Yes. Well, again, if you would like to join the conversation, we'd certainly welcome your phone calls, and we'll take those in just a minute, 1-800-351-1212. But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that we've also posted this piece, When Your Faith Cost You Your Job, with Coach Joe Kennedy. But it seems that you are also interacting with our friends at Coral Ridge Ministries. Tell us about that, because I think a lot of people like to know what's happening in the future.
Yeah, that was a big thing for me over the years is finding that sense of belonging. I felt like I was really in a shotgun pattern, and I was going here and there and everywhere. And I didn't mind doing the speaking, but I felt like I lost that direction of belonging to something and besides myself. And Coral Ridge Ministries, with Pastor Rob down there, we sat down, did an interview, and we hit it off so well, and we're so aligned in the way that we want our country and our faith to be expressed in life, that it just was a perfect mix. And now I'm part of the team, and I'm really looking forward to traveling with those guys and doing interviews and really sharing the Word of God with everyone.
And again, I think these are great opportunities. So just before I take a break, let me just mention that we have CoachJoeKennedy.com, and that is the website. If you also go, we do have a link to his Facebook page and X. If you scroll down a little bit, you will see that we also have the trailer for the Average Joe movie, in case you've never had a chance to see it. It's about 2 minutes long, and you might even want to watch it. And I think you were portrayed very well in that movie, and that certainly gives you an idea of what that's like. And then, of course, we have this interview that you've done with our friends at Coral Ridge Ministries, which, again, is one that I think most people would enjoy seeing, because it's about 25 minutes long, and you could watch that as well. So here's some resources for you. If you'd like to share this tonight around the dinner table, like to share it with others, maybe you'd say, I'd really like to have Coach Joe come and talk about not only his testimony, but we haven't even gotten into some of the things he's been talking about in terms of the need for us as Christians to stand for our faith, the need for us to exercise our religious liberty. Those are resources we're going to talk about as well. But I also want to give some of you a chance to share your own experience, maybe your testimony, maybe ask a question of Coach Joe. You've certainly seen him on the screen, maybe read his book, heard some of the interviews we've done over the years. So let's open up the phones, 800-351-1212. As we're going to a break, let me just mention, as I did yesterday, that we were able to meet our match. But again, there's still, as of yesterday, there was still some match money on the table. Don't know if there is now, but you could certainly click on that button that says join now, or call on our order line, 800-347-5151, if you didn't have a chance to give last week. And we are grateful for those of you that supported this ministry. And when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Coach Joe Kennedy, and we'll take some of those phone calls. All that coming up right after this.
It was not that long ago that censorship appeared to be almost inevitable. Free speech was being attacked and strangled in many places. And some of us wondered if this was the end. But now, many feel a new sense of hope, a chance for a fresh dawn. Let me caution you, now is not the time to relax. It's a time to press forward, to use this fresh opportunity to proclaim and learn how to apply truth to current issues. By the fact you're here, listening right now, that tells me that you recognize the vital role Point of View plays as a voice of truth. For more than 50 years, we've informed and equipped people who have made a real difference. And when you give to Point of View today, you breathe life into what can be a new golden era for the truth. Please, take a moment right now and invest in truth. Visit pointofview.net or give it 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net. Click in now or call 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation with Coach Joe Kennedy. Let me just mention real quickly as we're going to the break, I did mention the fact that I think we still have match money on the table. Yes, we do. More than $400 on the table, and you wouldn't leave $400 on the table without picking that up. So again, as we mentioned, because of the unique situation as we were ending on Friday, our Truth Team Week, we had a very significant match come in, and as a result, we can honestly say that if you click on that button right now that says Join Now, Anchored to Truth on our website, or give us a call at 800-347-5151. Your gift right now is dollar for dollar matched. And so, again, that does exist. I'll mention a little bit more before the end of the program, but let's, if we can, take some phone calls. That number to get you on the air is a different number, 800-351-1212. Scott, you're on with Coach Joe Kennedy.
Well, hi, Joe. How are you doing?
I'm wonderful, Scott. How are you doing, buddy?
I'm doing all right. I want to congratulate you for winning that victory. But it wasn't just you, it was the Lord. But I do have a question.
Amen.
And I say, hi, Kerby.
Hello.
What happened? I know when they were required, the school was required to take you back. And I just heard today that you said you retired the same day you went. Apparently the athletes were not allowed to have anything to do with you or any of the coaches. First of all, is that true? And if it is, did you do any more legal work against that particular district?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Right, yeah, they did not make it welcoming. The coaching staff, they did as good of a job as they could, but the school district itself started implementing all these rules that I was not to talk to any of the players or the parents. I wasn't allowed to go into the locker room, and they took all the fun out of coaching and really everything that coaching stood for. And I thought it was better, since God already just had me return and totally brought me back to my original place and restored everything, that would be a good time to step away. And we have been taking care of my father-in-law down in Pensacola, Florida. So it all worked out really well, and I had no desire to fight them anymore. But I tell you, my friends at First Liberty Institute, they were like, you have another case right here. And I said, let's just let this go. If they want to act like children, let them act like children. I think we did what we needed to do.
Scott, thank you for your question. And again, I'm glad we brought that up, because that was another element. As some people have said, first of all, why are you in Florida? Well, you just answered that question. Number two, how were you treated? And of course, I think we'd already heard some of that, but it was just good to fill that in, because as you well know, Coach Kennedy, because of your national prominence, there have been a lot of misinformation spread around. And that's why I thought it would be helpful to have you on the program so people could ask you a question if they had heard something and wondered if it was true. And so Scott kind of led us off in that regard. But let's, if we can, before we run out of time, talk about where you're going from here, because it does seem to me that God has opened a door. For a while, it looked like that door was closed, and then it looked like it sort of opened a little bit on 2022. Well, now we're in 2025. You actually are part of a team, and there are some real opportunities for individuals that maybe have read the book, seen the movie, or heard the story to have you come and really encourage Christians to stand for their faith. And that really was very much of the interview you did with our friends at Coral Ridge Ministries. Because, again, when your faith costs you your job, what do you do? And you're really encouraging people right now to not only consider the fact that there may be a legal issue in some cases, but actually to demonstrate courage. Because, as you said, Joe, you could have just simply said, okay, I'll just pray to myself at the end and I won't go to the 50-yard line. And so talk about some of the messages you're giving now.
Yeah. And that's a great point, is that there was that side of me that completely did not want to fight. These people are my friends. They've been my friends for, a decade. We spent holidays together. The superintendent, we go to the same church together. So this was awkward everywhere in our community. So the opportunity now is so incredible, especially for my wife and I. We speak at men's conferences and women's conferences, and we speak together at all kinds of events. And we get to share our story and to just show people that if they stand up for what they believe in and do what is right, that God will always win in the end of it. But to encourage and inspire people, that I think that's the biggest thing, is that people are not alone. And a lot of people go through these things, but to be able to fight through and to have the courage that even though you're scared and everything else, is that you just fight the good fight, you finish the race, and you remain faithful, and don't worry about it because God's got that victory already.
Let's see if we can talk about your wife for a few minutes, because I've been very impressed with her and the resilience that she showed. Again, just put yourself in her shoes for a minute, a listener, because you are actually part of the school district. Your kids are in the actual high school. Your coach husband is taking a stand, and it's not pleasant. And in some respects, I have always appreciated not only your testimony, but I've always been so appreciative of her testimony.
Oh man, I think her testimony is 1,000 times better, because God, if you look back on my life, I've been a fighter from the very beginning. God, when he made me, he made me a little scrapper, and I've been trained, especially in the military, to stand up and to fight. My wife, on the other hand, and my family, no, they want to not have any conflict whatsoever. So to see what God did in their lives is just so incredible, and what my wife had to endure on a daily basis at her work. And I encourage people, if you haven't seen the movie, it's not just a football movie. To me, it's a complete love story about showing the love of God and the love of a marriage and what it can really withstand. And boy, she gets extra credit for dealing with me.
Well, one of the other things I thought I might mention is that you do have some of those particular videos. There's one from First Liberty, and again, people that have maybe listened to some of the interviews we've done here on Point of View takes through some of the legal issues there. So that's on your website. And then, of course, we've already mentioned the fact that we have the trailer for the movie, but also that book's still doing pretty well. And it's, again, Average Joe, the inspirational true story of Coach Joe Kennedy, one man's faith in a fight to change the nation. And again, you probably have to pinch yourself sometimes to say, I can't believe that I'm an individual that was used to really set aside a very bad legal Supreme Court precedent known as the Lemon Test, and ultimately win so many rights for Christians around the country.
Yeah, I am definitely the least likely person that I would have ever picked to do this. I would have picked somebody who knew the Bible a lot better, was well more spoken or more influential or something. But I'm just high school football coach and a former Marine. There's nothing remarkable about me, and it just shows that God can use anyone. If he can use me to change the nation and overturn 8,000 court cases that for religious freedom and give us more religious freedom here in America than we've had in the past 50 years. Imagine what he could do with everybody else when they start standing up.
Wow. Just before we take a break, I would point out one thing that you bring to the table is a great sense of humor. I'm thinking of this interview that you did with CNN, and you're sitting next to Kelly Shackelford, and it's hard for either you or Kelly Shackelford not to break out laughing, because the whole time you're doing the interview, you're saying, I just want to thank you so much for standing with me and really supporting my view and everything. And, of course, everybody that knows anything about CNN, they weren't even close to standing up for you, but you kind of did that just because you decided that you maybe yank on their chain a little bit.
Oh, yeah. And, we use the same words that they've been beating us over the heads, like diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that just shows exactly what America is about, because that does include Christians and our faith and the diversity of our faith in America. And just to throw that back into their face and in a fun way, I thought it was really good to compliment them on that.
Yeah, that was a great sense of humor. And if you've ever seen the clip, it is fun. And they've shown it before in various venues. But let's take a break and come back. Any last questions some of you might have, because Coach Joe Kennedy is with us. And again, I want to thank one of the callers for focusing on a very important issue, because in some respects, we are aware of the fact that sometimes it turns out that some of the stories we hear were true and some of them were not. And we'll talk a little bit more about the need for us to have courage, stand for our faith, and how there are so many more open doors for religious liberty. Let me just mention as a program note that next hour we're going to have Gary Chapman with us for a little bit. He has co-authored a book on a simple guide for a better marriage, and I think you'll appreciate that. And then we're going to get back into the issues in the news. Tariffs are certainly one aspect of that, and so we'll get into those topics as well. But if you'd like to join the conversation for just a few more minutes, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes with Coach Joe Kennedy. Again, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. And we'll get to some calls, or maybe even next hour postpone some of those. But let's, if we can, maybe focus on one other issue, Joe, and that is we certainly are seeing some places where there's still a need for groups like First Liberty Institute or Alliance Defending Freedom, or just taking some of the cases that Kelly Shackelford and his team team have right now. You have a pastor who has had criminal charges brought against him for opening his church to the homeless. You have a woman in Connecticut, for example, who has a small crucifix at her workstation, and that is enough for them to actually take her off of her teaching duty, although she's been there for decades, because that's somehow an unconstitutional establishment of religion. We have individuals, some evangelists we've talked about, that have been told they can't preach God's word in certain areas or only in a certain prescribed free speech zone. So you have those sort of high visible cases, but I'm sure as well there are a number of other Christians listening today that find themselves in a similar situation to you, Coach. And so when you speak and even when you talk to individuals, what do you tell them?
Yeah, well, one, knowing what your rights are is something huge, and you nailed it on the head that there is so many cases going on. Just two in my hometown since the past 2 years of a sign being one of the soccer clubs putting a sign up that said Jesus, and they made him remove that. Another kid wanted to bring a Bible to church, or to school. So you hear about these all the time. They're happening every day, and that's why we do need Alliance Defending Freedom and First Liberty Institute, because they have their toolkits on what you can and can't do, and a lot of things could be settled if we just educate people. So that's what I want to encourage people to do, is to be able to know what their rights are and to be able to stand on those. And I have a verse, 2 Timothy 4:7, fight the good fight, finish the race, and remain faithful. Nowhere in there does it say that we have to win that, because the spoiler alert is, God's always has the victory. So we just need to do our part and let God worry about the rest of it.
You know, one of the websites I've been sending people to, and it's been put together by friends at First Liberty, called Restoring Faith in America, RFIA. And the bottom line is this: because of the Coach Kennedy case, as well as a few others that have come down since then, the Groff case and others, there is more religious freedom now in America than has existed in decades. But the way you get your freedom is to exercise it. And so many of these cities and communities and even localities which are told you can't post the 10 Commandments, you know what? Now you can. Some of the individuals that have said, well, you can't have a prayer club or a Bible club at your school. Well, you always have, but now you have even a greater opportunity to do with that. Pretty soon we're going to come to graduations, and you know, Joe, what's going to happen there? They're going to say, well, even if you are the valedictorian, you can't mention Jesus in your speech, and so it's going to be really important for people to speak on that issue. And, of course, even when you have certain holidays coming up to Easter, next year, of course, Christmas, Thanksgiving, well, we have to make it non-religious or secular. No, we don't. These victories in the Supreme Court are only as good as how individuals take that into their local community. And I know that's really what you're going to be challenging people to do as you go out and speak.
Oh, absolutely. That is exactly what we're doing. And it doesn't have to be showy. You don't have to be confrontational. You just have to be bold in your faith. You know, being a Christian or a person of any kind of faith, it's not just on Sunday. You need to be able to wear that on your sleeve at any time. Being a Christian is not a big deal as far as, oh my gosh, look, there's one. No, we should all be living a good Christian life and the principles that Jesus has taught us. And I'm encouraging everybody. And if anybody has a problem with it, tell them to call me, and I will help them out anytime I can.
That's so good. Again, I'm going to let you go, but let me just mention that we do have your website. It's CoachJoeKennedy.com. Pretty easy. And then, of course, we also have the trailer. We have the interview you've done with our friends at Coral Ridge Ministries. We're going to be looking forward to the partnership you've developed with them there. So if you'd like to read Joe's story, if you'd like to even read his resignation statement, if you'd like to get information about his book or about the movie, or even book him to come and speak for your particular group, all available at the website at pointofview.net, or you can go directly to CoachJoeKennedy.com. We've enjoyed following your long journey, and we certainly wish you the very best as you go out there and speak to the issue of faith and the issue of religious liberty. So thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Oh, thank you so much. And if you still have that matching fund thing, let me throw in a book to some of those people too. So if they give, they'll receive one of my books that I'll autograph for them too.
Oh, sounds pretty good, too. I'm not sure how we'll facilitate that. We'll figure that out later. But again, just before we take a break, as you mentioned, we did have that matching fund. Of course, we had so many of you support last week. That was very nice of you. And if you have not done so, just thought I'd mention the match still on the table. So as we go to a break, it's a good time to call because I know you're not going to want to miss the conversation with Gary Chapman. Or, of course, it may be April 1st, but this is not an April Fool's joke because tomorrow is what Donald Trump refers to as Liberation Day. What that means is on April 2nd, we are going to actually enact, or that is, he is, but we as a country are going to enact what are called reciprocal tariffs. So we're going to spend some time a little bit later next hour talking about what that means. I give you both a pro and a con. Two individuals. I respect both of them. I think they're pretty well argued, although I think I might, if we have enough time, point out a couple of, I think, somewhat logical flaws that some are making. But again, you can read them, and those are already on the website, and we'll talk about that. And, of course, probably the question I get more often off air this last week or so is it really possible that President Trump can actually serve a third term? And so I will try to answer that question quickly as well. Let's, if we can, also mention that, again, you can go to the website, click on that button that says Anchor to Truth, but you can also click on the button that says Viewpoints Commentary. My Viewpoints Commentary today is on truth. We've been talking about Anchor to Truth, and it's about the book Truth Changes Everything. It is a very good book written by our good friend, Dr. Jeff Myers, who is the head of Summit Ministries, and that book really helps us understand the distinction between truth and truths. And there is, I think, a real difference. The idea that there is one truth, a biblical truth, versus the idea that, well, you have your truth and I have my truth. Everybody has a different view of truth, kind of what we call postmodernism. But I think one of the most valuable parts of that book is chapters which go into incredible detail in how Jesus really changed art and science and justice and work. There have been a couple of other very good books like that as well, but this one certainly is worthwhile as well and just helps us understand that, again, Christianity really led to the rise of the modern world, especially Western civilization, and we are the inheritors of the Christian influence in so many different institutions. And so if Christianity was important for example, the rise of the scientific method, if Christianity important for our understanding of the arts and culture and things of that nature, don't you think Christianity would be important in the maintenance of that culture? I think we know the answer to that as well. So those are some resources that we have on the website today. Our Take Action item, one last time, is, again, no taxpayer funding for abortion. Next week, we're going to post another one having to do with, of course, DEI. We were going to post it this week, but we thought you've received probably a few too many emails, so we'll wait a week. But then we're going to get into other issues because once we have an executive order, a future president could remove that. So passing legislation, very key. So you can find information about all of that on our website, pointofview.net. Let's take a break. Talk with our good friend, Dr. Gary Chapman, right after this.
In 19th century London, two towering historical figures did battle, not with guns and bombs, but words and ideas. London was home to Karl Marx, the father of communism, and legendary Baptist preacher Charles Spurgeon. London was in many ways the center of the world, economically, militarily, and intellectually. Marx sought to destroy religion, the family, and everything the Bible supports. Spurgeon stood against him, warning of socialism's dangers. Spurgeon understood Christianity is not just religious truth, it is truth for all of life. Where do you find men with that kind of wisdom to stand against darkness today? Get the light you need on today's most pressing issues delivered to your inbox when you sign up for the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Every weekday, in less than 2 minutes, you'll learn how to be a person of light to stand against darkness in our time. It's free, so visit pointofview.net/signup right now. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I really appreciate your program. I don't get to listen to it every day because I have to work, but it's really a blessing to me and to all of us.
Everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
I do appreciate Point of View and what you folks are doing. You really are doing a great job to educate and to help Christian folks do a better job to honor Christ in all that we do.
I just appreciate all you guys do. I mean, I learned so much, and it's amazing what you teach that I say to other people, and they look at me like, where did you hear that? So I appreciate you guys. So thank you for all you do.
I just turned your program on, and I want to just let you know how much I appreciate just getting the truth out.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, we're going to be spending some time, first of all, talking with our good friend Dr. Gary Chapman about a new book, A Simple Guide for a Better Marriage. Then we're going to get into some of the issues in the news at the bottom of the hour, because after all, President Trump has said tomorrow is Liberation Day. Some may agree with that and some may disagree with that, but April 2nd is when a lot of those tariffs will be announced, and we'll talk about that as well. Gary Chapman, of course, is best known for his books on love languages, but I might also say that as you get into this book with 31 chapters, about 200 pages published by Moody Press, you also have material that I think he's pulled from some of his books on loving your spouse when you feel like walking away, things I wish I'd known before I was married, the marriage you've always wanted, and of course so many of those 5 love languages on love languages for apology and love languages as a way of life, and much, much more. An individual that, of course, has had so much success in the various books he's published, selling over 20 million copies. He's been on the New York Times bestseller list, and of course also has a nationally syndicated radio program on the Moody Broadcasting Network and other affiliate stations. So, Dr. Gary Chapman, welcome back to Point of View.
Well, thank you, Kerby. Great to be with you again.
Well, this book, I think, in some respects, pulls bits and pieces from other books, and this may be more of the kind of book I would hand to a newlywed, or for somebody who's really trying to figure out what's going on in their marriage, because maybe they're dealing with intimacy, maybe they're dealing with problems with communication, maybe dealing with emotions or apologies. A lot of this was very familiar reading for me, because it is similar to some of the other books we've talked about here on Point of View.
Yeah, you're right, Kerby. I pulled together in this book from the 45 years of counseling I have had and tried to write them in short chapters, because I find today that people prefer short chapters. Get to the point, you know. But I'm dealing with a lot of different topics that I have dealt with in some of my other books as well. But I think it's going to be a book that's going to help, yes, a lot of young couples who are getting married, but also couples that are just want to grow. Because let's face it, marriages either get better or they get worse. We don't stand still. And so this is a book I think folks are going to find practical ideas that are going to help them move toward a better marriage.
You know, Dr. Chapman, also, we have quite a number of people that oftentimes are looking for a small group study or a life group gathering, or maybe a Sunday school class. At the end of each one of your 31 chapters, you have a section which says, think about it, discuss it, apply it. So that could be something for a small group as well. But let's get into this, because you talk about this idea of a foundation of marriage. If you don't get the foundation right, everything else is going to crumble underneath it, isn't it?
Well, I think that's true, and I think, so many times in America, at least, we think of marriage as a contract. You know, I'll do this if you do that.
Yes.
And the Bible says marriage is a covenant. It's not, I'll do this if you'll do that. You know, God made a covenant with us, and God always keeps his covenant. So the covenant is initiated for the benefit of somebody else. We wouldn't even be here if God hadn't made a covenant, and with Noah and a lot of others in the Old Testament too. So it's unconditional. We say it's in the ceremony typically, in sickness and in health. I'm here for you. I'm going to be here for you. It's based on love. A covenant is based on love. I'm not talking about the feeling of love. I'm talking about the attitude of love. I'm in this marriage to enrich your life. If we begin to understand that the biblical concept of marriage is a covenant, then we're off to a good start.
One of the chapters, or actually one whole section, a number of chapters, is on communication. That is something you're known for because you talk about everything from 5 levels of communication to quality communication. And Dr. Chapman, since we're 2 old guys around the table, we can remember a time when communication might have been a problem in the 60s and 70s, maybe even in the 80s. But then we got this thing called cell phones, and it does seem to me that communication has been negatively affected by those devices more than probably any other particular intrusion into our lives.
I think that's often true, Kerby. I was talking the other day to a couple, and the wife said, we'll be having a conversation. His cell phone rings, he answers his phone. And I'm sitting there listening to him talk to somebody else. So I just get up and walk out of the room,
Sad.
It's like we're bound to answer the phone. And I say, let it go to voicemail. You're talking to your spouse.
But again, you're talking about the need for us to really have genuine truth talk. And sometimes our conversations with so many of our friends, oftentimes even with our kids, is really just kind of fact-based or whatever, maybe even sometimes emotional-based, but it isn't genuine communication. So you really kind of take us through some of the things that need to change if we're really going to have a true heart-to-heart communication with our spouse.
Yeah, I think, first of all, we have to recognize that we're married to a human, and humans don't think the same way. They don't have the same feelings. We don't have the same history. And so I don't care who you marry. You're going to disagree on a lot of stuff as you go along. Some of it's minimal stuff. Some of it's important stuff. But if we're going to process marriage and have a sense of oneness that the Bible talks about, husband and wife coming together as one, have intimacy in the marriage, then we're going to have to learn how to listen to our spouse and see their perspective, not sitting there loading your guns, and saying, well, I know they're wrong on that. I can't wait till they get through talking, but listening to understand what they're thinking and what they're feeling so that you can eventually honestly say, honey, I can see how that makes sense. I didn't get it before, but I can see how that makes sense. And that still doesn't mean we agree with them necessarily, but it does mean that we now see their perspective. And when we recognize that, we're treating them as a human. I've sometimes said to husbands and wives at a conference, I said, okay, guys, would you turn to her right now and just say to her, honey, that makes sense to me. And from now on, I'm going to treat you like a human.
Very good.
I'm going to let you have ideas that are different from mine.
One of your chapters is on change without manipulation. And of course, you've told the story before that you and your wife are a little bit different when it comes to the issue of organization. So I've heard that from you before. But it does seem to me that we need to be able to listen. And in some cases, some individuals need to change, but maybe we're expecting too much too quickly, aren't we?
Well, I think that's true. And I say, certainly it's okay to try to negotiate things that irritate you, And if you can change things, why not change things? If your wife is irritated by something and she shares that with you, well, why not try to change if you can? But there's some things your spouse.
Think I lost you? Guess I lost.
Yeah.
Oh, there. Yeah.
And so that's where we have to accept the reality. And you mentioned one in my marriage was the way we load a dishwasher. I load it in a very organized manner. Carolyn loads the dishwasher like she was playing Frisbee, And when I brought it up to her, she said, I don't have time to do that. When I'm cooking, I don't have time to organize it, And this went on for a long time. I just tried to help her understand and that we were losing glasses in the morning because I unload the dishwasher, And finally she said, honey, if that is so important to you, why don't you load the dishwasher?
That was a solution. Let's take a break. We have more to cover, and we are privileged to have with us for just a little bit longer Dr. Gary Chapman. We have a link to 5lovelanguages.com and also information about the book. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
we face a battle for truth every day. That is why I was delighted to interview Dr. Jeff Myers of Summit Ministries on his new book, Truth Changes Everything. His first 4 chapters focus on truth in various ways. One chapter explores the differences between the truth viewpoint and the truths viewpoint. Another chapter tells ancient stories about truth. More importantly, he provides a method to evaluate different views of truth and show how non-biblical views of truth always fail. One of the most valuable sections of the book are the 8 chapters that go into detail about how Jesus followers have changed art, science, justice, work, as well as a perspective on so many important ideas. For example, Jesus followers have changed how we value life. Until Jesus, care, charity, and compassion were usually seen as defects rather than virtues. That we consider human life valuable and want to help others through the development of medicine and mental health care can be attributed to a biblical worldview. Jesus followers have changed the world of science. He explains that nearly every founder of various scientific disciplines during the scientific revolution was a Christian or at least a theist. Jesus followers have changed the world of art by making the case for objective beauty. We can also add the influence Christians have had in politics with the writings that set forth principles we hold based upon law, liberty, and freedom. He concludes with practical ideas and describes 14 ways to practice speaking up in a way that builds truth. If you want to understand today's challenges and want to provide a wise biblical response, I recommend Truth Changes Everything. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Inflation, go to viewpoints.info/inflation. That's viewpoints.info/inflation. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continuing our conversation for a few more minutes with Dr. Gary Chapman. The book is entitled A Simple Guide for a Better Marriage, Quick Practical Insights Every Couple Needs to Thrive. Over 200 pages, 31 chapters broken into various sections with a question and answer opportunity at the end of each chapter, which you could do individually or even as a group. But Dr. Chapman, let's see if we can get into a couple of others. One is apologies and forgiveness. You've written about this before and talked about the art of apologizing. But first of all, just to get to this issue of forgiveness, a relationship of any sort, whether it's a friendship or a marriage, is not going to thrive if there are unforgiven issues and if you cannot be willing to forgive individuals, especially if they seek forgiveness. True?
Yeah, I think it's one of the essentials to having a long-term healthy marriage. We have to deal effectively with our failures. You know, none of us are perfect. You don't have to be perfect to have a healthy marriage, but we do have to deal with our failures. And that means we're willing to apologize when we realize that we've done something that's hurtful to the other person, and then to forgive when they're apologizing to us. But, you know, one of the things I share in this book is just a brief synopsis of a book. I wrote a whole book on the 5 apology languages.
Right.
Is we have different ideas on how to apologize.
That's right.
So he says, you know, to her, I'm sorry, honey. And she's thinking, you certainly are. Is there anything else you want to say? He thinks he's apologizing. She thinks he's giving a character report, you know. So, you know, and we were all taught how to apologize, typically by our parents, if we were taught at all. And we did find this, about 10% of the population almost never apologizes for anything, and most of them are men who learned it from their fathers, who said real men don't apologize.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and we know where he got that. You know, John Wayne, that great theologian. You know, so I deal with that in the book because I think we have to learn how to apologize in a way that's meaningful to the other person. And when you understand that you likely have a different idea and they have a different idea, because what we're thinking about is if they're apologizing to us, we're asking, are they sincere? And if so, it's easier to forgive them. And so,
Yes.
I deal with also what forgiveness does and doesn't do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, forgiveness pardons them. We're not going to make you pay for it. I'm not going to hit you over the head for the next 3 months about it. I'm going to pardon you. And the other is to take away, to remove the barrier that this has created between us so that now we can go forward in our relationship. So, apologizing and forgiving, huge, huge aspect of having a healthy marriage.
Well, and again, accepting responsibility and all the issues that are associated with that. And again, I do remember your book on this whole idea of the love languages of apology and offering restitution, requesting forgiveness, and all the rest. But another very important section is what you call emotions, anger, and conflict management. Again, that's a whole book. I understand that. But it does seem to me that we live as human beings. We're not robots, as you pointed out before. And the emotions are very significant. But you can't always necessarily trust your emotions. You need to figure out when you're listening to your emotions whether they're true and to really kind of apply a biblical principle, correct?
Yeah, we don't choose our emotions. All of us have emotions every day, some positive, some negative. We don't choose them. It's just our emotional response to what happened or what is happening or what we think has happened around us. And so nothing wrong with having emotions, even the emotion of anger. I've heard people say, well, anger is a sin. Well, the Bible says God is angry every day with the wicked. I think we get angry because we're made in God's image.
Yes.
We have a concern for right. And when we feel like something's not right, then, we feel angry. But I think we have two kinds of anger. God has only one because God sees everything as it really is. But we have anger when we simply don't get our way, and that's a selfish anger. But either one of them, we have to handle the anger. And that's why the scriptures say, being angry, or when you're angry, don't sin. So we're responsible for our reactions to our emotions.
Right.
We're not responsible for our emotions. They are going to happen. But how we respond to them is going to make all the difference in the world. If we're led by our emotions, especially our negative emotions, we're going to make things worse. But if we acknowledge our emotions, one of the things I suggest about anger is, how about putting this on your refrigerator door? Little sign that says, I'm feeling angry right now, but don't worry, I'm not going to attack you, but I do need your help. Is this a good time to talk? And I say, pull it off the refrigerator, stand in front of your spouse or your child or anybody else. The whole family can use this, and stand in front of them and read it. And it just adds a little humor to it, but it also says, I'm feeling angry. I'm not going to attack you, but I do need to talk. And it's a good way to start talking in a meaningful way.
Well said. Again, anybody that is familiar with your 5 love languages certainly would recognize you have a chapter on differences in expectations, but you broaden that to talk about differences in terms of personality, differences in terms of how you process things spiritually. So again, oftentimes it is very true that opposites attract, and then sometimes they attack. And so dealing with the issue of differences, a very important principle in marriage, isn't it?
It really is. And I think we have to come to, as I said earlier, accept some of those differences because they're not going to change. There's some people that just are not wired to keep up with their car keys. And every time they leave the house, they're going to say, where are my keys? Where are my keys? Where are my keys? And I don't care how many times you put a hook out there in the garage and say, hang them on the hook. They're not going to hang them on the hook. They're not wired that way. So the best thing you can do is get you 2 or 3 sets of keys. Just say, honey, use these. We'll find the others. And you will. Maybe in the refrigerator, but you'll find them, God intended the differences to help us, not to hinder us. I mean, 2 people were exactly alike. What? No. We're different. 2 minds are better than 1. So that's why we need to respect the differences and utilize the differences, because some of us are more organized than others. Some of us are, more excited about things and exuberant about things, and they'll pull us into things. Like my wife has pulled me into things I never wanted to go to. But when I went there, well, okay, I came to appreciate it, you know. It took me a while to learn about the symphony because I'm not musical. You know, I didn't know what an oboe was, but my wife loves the symphony. And now I appreciate the symphony, you know. And same thing's the other way. The lady said, Dr. Chapman, I just don't get it. He goes to these car races. They just go round and round and round and round and round. Why? I understand why she doesn't get it. But if he loves it, why not do something he loves and do it with him? You know, you don't have to enjoy it the way he enjoys it. Marriage is doing things together.
That's right. Let me just mention, just before we run out of time, that we do have the 5lovelanguages.com. That's one of the places where you can go. Of course, we also have a link to a simple guide for a better marriage. Now, first of all, you probably can find it in your local bookstore, but if you cannot, our good friends at Moody have it available both in paperback and Kindle, and so you can find it there as well. But just before we go, Dr. Gary Chapman, this is written really for individuals to go through, but because you've had discussion questions at the end, I think this really could be a small group study, couldn't it?
I think it can be, yeah, and I would encourage us couples that are in a group to at least read it and see what you think about it, you know, because it covers a lot of topics related to marriage in a short, as I said, in short chapters, and things that are very, very open to, or lends itself to discussion in a group.
Well, again, we just always appreciate the various books that you have written. We appreciate the fact that you're always so gracious to give us time here on Point of View. And as always, I look forward to the next opportunity.
Well, thank you, Kerby. You keep up the good work.
Again, Dr. Gary Chapman, I would recommend any of his books, but especially that whole 5 Love Language series, and there are so many good ones. But if you wanted to get them all kind of compact into about 220 pages and 31 chapters, very short, as you can imagine then, very readable, this is a book that I may just start handing to newlyweds or maybe those who are thinking about marriage. But again, it's also got enough information there that if you need maybe a 2,000-mile, 20,000-mile wheel alignment or checkup, that might work as well. A simple guide for a better marriage, quick, practical insights every couple needs to thrive. So again, you can find all that information on our website. I would be pretty sure that you could find this book in your local bookstore, but if you would like to order it online, we've made it possible for you to do so by going to the website pointofview.net. Of course, we still have that banner there, Anchored to Truth, and our goal for fundraising, which we were able to meet last week. I thought I'd mention that one more time, but when we come back, let's get into it. Tariffs first. Tomorrow is supposedly Liberation Day. I'll do my best to try to give you some of the pros and cons, maybe even a little bit of background on tariffs. And then I thought we'd end the program by our friend Jim Dennison, 5 ways President Trump might serve a third term. I know many of you saying, oh, please no. And then some are probably saying, yeah, that'd be a good idea. I have my doubts as to whether any of that would happen. But you've been asking the question, so I'll try to give an answer to it. All that coming up right after this.
At Point of View, we believe there is power in prayer. And that is why we have relaunched our Pray for America campaign, a series of weekly emails to unite Americans in prayer for our nation. Imagine if hundreds of thousands of Americans started praying intentionally together on a weekly basis. You can help make that a reality by subscribing to our Pray for America emails. Just go to pointofview.net and click on the Pray for America banner that's right there on the homepage. Each week you'll receive a brief news update, a specific prayer guide, and a free resource to equip you in further action. We encourage you to not only pray with us each week, but to share these prayers and the resources with others in your life. Join the movement today. Visit pointofview.net and click on the banner Pray for America right there at the top. That's pointofview.net. Let's pray together for God to make a difference in our land. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, let's we can talk about Liberation Day, which is tomorrow. I will be off because I'm speaking, but I'm sure that Dr. Merrill Matthews will probably get into it in some detail. He'll be with us also on Friday, so we'll get back into it. But this is an attempt by Donald Trump tomorrow to enact what are called reciprocal tariffs because of the fact that we've had a $1.2 trillion trade deficit. The argument that he made is over the decades, they've ripped us off like no country has ever been ripped off in history, and we're going to be much nicer than they were to us, but it's a substantial money for the country. And the argument coming from the Treasury Secretary is that focus on these reciprocal tariffs. Also, the economic advisor for the White House, Kevin Hassett, who we've interviewed before and actually quoted, said the focus of the tariffs will be on about 10 to 15 countries. So we'll see where that goes, and I'm sure we'll be talking about it for some time. Now, is it true that these countries actually have some pretty draconian kinds of tariffs? Well, Jim Garrity, who I quote so often, actually has put together this list here looking at countries. And this, by the way, is something you could probably find if you went out and looked for it, gives a list of countries from, and this is about 5 pages of list of everything from Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Canada, China, all the way at the end when you're talking about such things as Taiwan, Thailand, Turkey, United Kingdom, Vietnam. And the bottom line is, yes, we do have other countries that are charging on imported goods from the United States. And so there is already a tariff war or a trade war that already exists. And Donald Trump is saying it's time to level the playing field with maybe the goal that eventually we get to free trade. Now, let me give you a little background, and then I have 2 articles, one pro, one con. 2 individuals I respect who disagree with one another, but I think try to make the case either for tariffs or against them. But maybe just a little history, because lots of times you will have somebody when they're talking about tariffs talk about Smoot-Hawley, and you go, what is that? I don't remember my history books covering that, or if they did, I forgot it. And back in 1930, you had what was called the Smoot-Hawley Tariff, took place in June of 1930. You have Willis Hawley, who was the representative from the state of Oregon, introducing a tariff bill in 1929. Eventually, a version of that, after it had been changed, passed in 1930. Then, at the same time, you also had Senator Reed Smoot from Utah introducing his version, and it passed. Then there was a conference bill, and eventually you have what is called the Smoot-Hawley Tariff. It was something which actually led to a trade war, and a very good article that came out recently by Ed Yardini. It's actually a reprint of an article he wrote back in 1985. They've reprinted it because it's like we're here once again. Back then, he was talking about a bill that would impose a 25% tax on all imports from Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and Brazil. Does that sound familiar? Well, the percentages are about the same, but maybe the countries have changed. And so there are some that have said, well, we've done this before. It didn't turn out so well. But Jeff Couillere says that here is some evidence that comes from the former and now the senior advisor on trade and manufacturing, Peter Navarro, who talks about that if you go to certain places, for example, you will see that if you go to Mexico, there's an American manufacturing plant that's about the size of 50 football fields, and they're making engines down there instead of here in this country. And so the goal is to actually launch what is called Liberation Day on issuing 25% tariffs on things like automotive imports. The argument being made right now by not only the Treasury Secretary, but the Commerce Secretary and the President is that eventually the money that could come from these various tariffs would have the External Revenue Service actually grow larger than the Internal Revenue Service. And they sort of want to remind you that until we got our first income tax in 1913, the nation actually was funded by tariffs. Of course, as Dr. Merrill Matthews has said, probably will say tomorrow, and certainly will mention again on Friday, the government is a whole lot bigger now, so trying to fund the entire government on tariffs, not going to happen. But nevertheless, the argument being made here, and this comes from Peter Navarro and also the author that wrote this first article, is that when in the first term, the Trump administration imposed historic tariffs on China and on steel and aluminum, the argument is we got price stability, prosperity, and we will again. And so the argument is that maybe these various foreign countries will cut their prices to observe some of the costs. Well, we'll see where it goes. And, of course, you also have the fact that there are a number of investments that have taken place. If you listened last week, I gave you the short list, and it's a very long list of companies ranging from Hyundai and Apple and others that say they're going to bring various company manufacturing back to the United States, to various countries like Saudi Arabia and others that are. And so the argument being made in our first article, which is for these tariffs, is that if you look at the United States, it has some of the lowest average tariff rates in the world. And as a result, this would be a way to actually counteract what happened when we had the North American Free Trade Agreement, where you've had, for example, the president of the United Auto Workers arguing that about 90,000 manufacturing facilities left the United States, something we talked about back really in the 1980s. Here in 1990s, I should say, in terms of that on point of view. That's the pro argument, and I'm giving you a very brief summary of that. The con argument comes from Dominic Pino, in which he says, look, every free trader has heard it. Sure, we love to have free trade. Sounds nice, but in the real world, it can't happen. Supposedly, free trade is a utopian position. He's arguing it's just the opposite. The idea of protectionism is actually backwards, and then takes us through some various arguments, actually, interesting enough, quoting from Adam Smith. And so he says that protectionism is more utopianism because, according to him, protectionism says that the natural human regard for self-interest that undergirds trade is actually a disease in need of treatment. He says it posits that people need to act contrary to human nature to really thrive, and that therefore their desires and preferences must be reformed. I'm not sure I buy that argument in terms of human nature, but let's go on. Then the agent of reformation, according to protectionists, is the government. And then you have to have the faith that the government can pick the right industries to benefit the good of everyone else. And I think you can honestly see that every time we've allowed government, whether it is unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats or elected politicians who serve in Congress or even in the White House, don't always do the best job of picking and choosing. And so spend some time actually saying that politicians have a way of arguing, he says, that the national interest coincides with their own political considerations. And he says, but it's not surprising that why domestic steel firms are the top beneficiaries of protectionism in recent years. He doesn't mention that, but you can also talk about sugar subsidies and various tariffs on various goods that are protecting particular kinds of agencies. Donald Trump isn't necessarily saying I'm going to protect one particular group or another, although he does talk about oftentimes automobiles. He's talking about just across the board. And it will be interesting to see how that is the case. He also points out, I think it is nice that he points out the fact that there have been some that have tried to make an academic case for tariffs, and even quotes from an individual, Stephen Merriam, who actually has put together a paper on a user's guide to restructure the global trading plan. And so the argument there might have some validity. But his last argument is, the Constitution prevents us from having trade tariffs between states. So what we have here in the United States is one of the largest free trade zones in the world. the entire United States is a free trade zone. And, of course, it might be that, I don't know, he says Massachusetts might like to have trade protection against, say, Mississippi or something like that. But we have seen that without tariffs, the United States as a whole has done very well working with all the states together. And so that's his argument, that free trade is really how you live your life, and free trade is really how we live right now within the United States. So what is his argument makes, would we say that if we think it's valuable not to have states have trade barriers against each other, why do we then say that countries should have trade barriers? It's an argument that necessarily I don't completely agree with, but it's the argument he makes. And if you find yourself saying, okay, I've got to think this through a little bit. We're going to be in a trade war. We're going to have tariffs. How do I think about this? And I've given you what I think is one of the best pro arguments, one of the best con arguments, and they're both on the website at pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, this we can get to a question that I get all the time, but real quickly, I understand that we have met the match, and first of all, I want to thank Tony in New Hampshire and anybody else that was part of that. That's at least the name I know at the moment, so met that match, and that is a done deal, and we're moving on with some other issues. But a lot of people have been saying, we keep hearing the president talking about the possibility of a third term. We have a 22nd Amendment. Doesn't that end it? And so let's get into this in a little bit of detail. First of all, the 22nd Amendment, no person shall be elected to the office of president more than twice, and no person who has held the office of president or acted as president for more than 2 years of a term to which some other person was elected president shall be elected to the office of president more than once. So again, it kind of limits you pretty quickly. Since the argument Mr. Trump has been elected to the office of president twice, it would seem the question's a moot point, right? You'd be wrong. There are some people that are looking around this. Now, first of all, this is complicated. Second of all, I think in some respects, although they're trying to find a way to actually adhere to the letter of the law, they're obviously violating the spirit of the law. But our friend Dr. Jim Dennison put it out today. I thought, well, this is probably the best summary I've seen so far. 5 ways President Trump might serve a third term. I don't think it's going to happen, but I thought I'd certainly try to answer it because this is the most asked question I'm receiving right now. One possibility they're talking about is someone could run for president in 2028 with Mr. Trump as the running mate, as the vice president, be elected, then resign from office, returning Mr. Trump to the White House. Okay, technically true. He wasn't elected as president. He was elected as vice president. But then you get to the 12th Amendment, which says that no person constitutionally ineligible for the office of president shall be eligible to that of vice president of the United States. Written at the time in which they were having such a big deal about a person that is born overseas and not a natural-born individual. I've oftentimes thought that there are 2 things that maybe we should take out of the Constitution. One is that you have to be a natural-born citizen. That eliminates Arnold Schwarzenegger and Elon Musk, not that he would ever run, and all sorts of people like that. Also, the idea of the 22nd Amendment, the people have the right to decide whether or not to elect or not defeat an individual, but those are part of the Constitution now. So it really kind of gets you into, all right, how would the Supreme Court rule then you wouldn't be eligible to run for president, but you could run as vice president? So that's option number 1. There's a lot more, but let me get to all the other options and come back and critique them as a whole. So that's the first option. Somebody else runs, whether it's J.D. Vance, whether it's Ron DeSantis, whether it's Marco Rubio, whoever it might be. And as a result, Donald Trump runs as the vice president. I don't see that happening, but okay, that's number 1. Number 2 is that Mr. Trump could be elected vice president in 2028. Then the elected president could be declared unable to discharge the powers and duties of the office, in which by the 25th Amendment he would come in. Again, that's got the same problem, I think, as the first one. The third option would be for a person to be elected vice president in 2028, then resign. The newly elected president would then nominate Mr. Trump to actually serve as the vice president, and Congress would approve the nomination, as occurred in the 25th Amendment with Gerald Ford in 1973. That one at least could happen, and then that president could resign and Donald Trump would take office. Pretty convoluted, but that one I think might pass constitutional muster. I just don't see it happening either. But you're saying there's 2 more. That's right. The fourth option would be for the Constitution to be amended to allow a person to serve 3 non-consecutive terms as president. Okay, now you're really dreaming, because you'd have to have 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate, and 3/4 of what? The state legislatures to approve that, all before basically 3 years from now. Not happening. Very unlikely. And then the fifth approach would be for Mr. Trump just simply be appointed by the president as an unofficial advisor, allowing him to continue to exercise the power of the presidency without the actual title. Now, some of you listening right now say, wait a minute, that's kind of what Barack Obama was doing with Joe Biden. Yes, and this is why, as now you're knowing we're in la-la land, some people have suggested maybe Donald Trump could run for a third term, and if that were seen as legal, both Barack Obama and he could run against each other, and in 2028 you'd have Barack Obama running against Donald Trump. At this point, we are really in no man's land, and I don't see any of that happening. Okay, let me hasten to offer the first point. I did not anticipate back in 2015 and 2016, or even in 2015, that Donald Trump would actually run. Then when he came down the escalator, didn't think he would win the nomination and didn't think he'd win the presidency. So there is a sense in which when you're dealing with an individual like Donald Trump, maybe you just better not make any predictions, but that is certainly one of those issues. There are some other, of course, associated issues, not the least of which is the questions about age. That question of age certainly surfaced in the second term of Ronald Reagan. It certainly surfaced in the first term of Joe Biden. Believe me, it's going to surface more and more in the second term of Donald Trump. And one of the things I was saying off air to my producer, Steve Miller, is the fact that there have been some people in the past that have asked the question, just hypothetically, if we had not passed the 22nd Amendment to the Constitution, which was passed after Franklin Delano Roosevelt served more than 2 terms, would it have been possible for any individual to have run for a 3rd term? And the argument is, well, of course, with the assassination of John F. Kennedy, that was the ending. You, of course, had the partial issue of Lyndon Johnson because he served part of that time and could have run again but decided not to. There was no evidence. Of course, Richard Nixon resigned because of Watergate. Jimmy Carter was defeated. Ronald Reagan, I just mentioned a minute ago, because of Alzheimer's, was considered too feeble. George Herbert Walker Bush only won 1 term. Bill Clinton, by the time you get to the 2nd term, there was a fair amount of controversy showing his opinion ratings was too low to think about him even being able to possibly run for a 3rd term. George W. Bush, maybe, but probably not because of sort of war weariness. They mostly concluded that the only person who might have been able to run for a 3rd term would have been Barack Obama. But even then, the bloom was sort of off of the rose because of Obamacare and a number of others. So whether we had a 22nd Amendment or not, 3rd terms probably not very likely anyway, but you would think the Constitution spoke to it. So if you've always wondered, would it be possible for Donald Trump to serve a 3rd term in one of these 5 ways, 2 of which just don't seem constitutional, or 3 other ways which seem to really try to violate at least the spirit of the 22nd Amendment, are possible, but I still think they're pretty unlikely. So if you've heard people talking about it, well, there's some of the information that maybe you have all wanted to have. And if you are interested, of course, you can look it up and find the piece by Jim Dennison. I think it's in his daily article, and you can read it for yourself. But it's just one of those questions that you have that sometimes I never would have anticipated we'd be talking about on Point of View. But that's why we try to cover just about every possible issue you can imagine. We've talked about out-of-body experiences. We've talked about UFOs. We talked about a 3rd term for the presidency, which I think is about as likely as you've seen a UFO tonight. But nevertheless, we try to cover every possible issue here on Point of View. Every topic is on the table. Sometimes we just don't have enough time to get to it. And since we're out of time, let me thank Megan for help engineering the program. Steve, thank you for producing the program. Tomorrow you'll have Dr. Merrill Matthews sitting in, and we'll be back on Thursday and Friday right here on Point of View.
It almost seems like we live in a different world from many people in positions of authority. They say men can be women and women men. People are prosecuted differently or not at all, depending on their politics. Criminals are more valued and rewarded than law-abiding citizens. It's so overwhelming, so demoralizing. You feel like giving up. But we can't. We shouldn't. We must not. As Winston Churchill said to Britain in the darkest days of World War II, never give in, never give in, never, 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 never yield to force, never yield to the apparently overwhelming might of the enemy. And that's what we say to you today. This is not a time to give in, but to step up and join Point of View in providing clarity in the chaos. We can't do it alone, but together, with God's help, we will overcome the darkness. Invest in biblical clarity today at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.